The manual wasn't supposed to exist. It was a dense, leather-bound tome titled The Codex of Ethereal Jurisprudence, found tucked away behind a loose brick in the basement of Blackwood Manor. For months, the estate had been unlivable. Cold spots, shattering glass, and a terrifying, faceless entity that manifested at exactly 2:44 a.m. had driven away 3 different families. But Arthur wasn't a regular tenant. He was a corporate defense attorney, a man who lived to dissect the fine print. While others screamed and ran, Arthur took notes. He realized quickly that the haunting followed a rigid, unyielding pattern. The entity could only manifest within rooms containing an active light source, and its terrifying shrieks always lasted exactly 72 seconds. To Arthur, this wasn't supernatural chaos, it was a contract. A poorly drafted one. On a stormy Tuesday night, as the clock ticked toward the dreaded hour, Arthur sat in the grand parlor with the open codex, a legal notepad, and a fountain pen. When the air turned to ice and the grandfather clock chimed, a looming shadow tore itself from the wall, its form shifting like black smoke, teeth glinting in a mouth that stretched too wide. It let out a sound that vibrated the floorboards. Arthur didn't flinch. He cleared his throat, raised a finger, and spoke over the din. Under subsection 4, paragraph B of the Ethereal Covenant, any entity attempting an unmanifestation sequence without prior 3-day written notice to the deedholder is subject to immediate spatial restriction. The shadow froze, its unnatural shriek cutting off mid-note. For the first time in a century, the ghost was silent. The entity hovered in the center of the parlor, its smoky form undulating with what looked like sheer confusion. It didn't possess eyes, yet Arthur could feel a heavy, ancient malice locked onto him. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the crackle of lightning outside. Arthur adjusted his glasses, completely unfazed by the terrifying presence. Furthermore, he continued, flipping a page in his notepad, you are currently utilizing approximately 42 square feet of airspace that, according to local property ordinances, is classified as private residential territory. You have paid no spectral tithes, nor have you obtained a haunting permit from the subterranean magistrate. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards. The air pressure in the room dropped drastically, making Arthur's ears pop. The entity extended a long, shadowy appendage toward him, stopped by an invisible barrier exactly 3 inches from his face. Arthur smiled coldly. Article 9, Protection from Spectral Battery. You cannot touch a living soul unless they actively invite you into their subconscious. I have signed no such waiver. The entity shrank back slightly, its form coalescing into something vaguely human, dressed in centuries-old rags. It seemed to realize it was caught in a trap of its own ancient design. The rules of the universe bound both the living and the dead, and Arthur had spent his entire life mastering how to weaponize those rules. According to the precedent set in the parish of St. Jude versus the Weeping Lady, Arthur declared, your failure to comply with basic haunting etiquette strips you of your right to terrorize this property. Effective immediately, you are restricted to the broom closet. With a violent, thunderous crack, the entity was suddenly pulled backward across the room, dragged by an invisible, cosmic force. It thrashed against the air, letting out a silent, furious scream as the door to the small hallway broom closet flew open. The shadow was forcibly compressed, shoved into the tight, dark space, and the wooden door slammed shut. The brass lock clicked into place on its own, sealing the spirit inside. Arthur let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The parlor returned to its normal temperature. The oppressive weight that had hung over Blackwood Manor for decades vanished in an instant. He walked over to the closet, tapping the wood with his fountain pen. You will remain there until the expiration of the current fiscal quarter, at which point we can negotiate a renewal of your haunting license under stricter terms, he said, feeling a deep sense of professional triumph. He had literally rules lawyered a ghost. For the next 3 weeks, the house was peaceful. Arthur slept soundly, enjoyed his mornings, and spent his evenings reading by the fireplace. Occasionally, he would hear a faint, pathetic scratching coming from the broom closet at 2:44 a.m., but it was easily ignored. He had won. He had taken the most terrifying haunting in the state and reduced it to a minor zoning violation. But Arthur failed to understand one fundamental truth about lawyers, living or dead. If you abuse the system long enough, the system will find a way to break you back. It started on the 24th night. Arthur was working late at his desk when he noticed a strange sound. It wasn't the usual frantic scratching from the closet. It sounded like pages turning. Rapidly, violently. He looked down at the Codex of Ethereal Jurisprudence resting on the corner of his desk. The heavy book was vibrating, its yellowed parchment pages flipping entirely on their own, illuminated by a strange, sickly green hue that bled from the text. Suddenly, the book slammed shut with a noise like a gunshot. The green light didn't disappear, instead, it began to seep out from under the leather cover, crawling across the mahogany wood of his desk like glowing veins. Arthur stood up, knocking his chair over backward. The temperature didn't just drop this time, it plummeted past freezing. His breath billowed out in thick, frantic clouds. From the hallway, a sound echoed that made his blood run cold. It was the slow, metallic turning of a key. The broom closet door didn't slam open, it drifted open an inch at a time, creaking softly in the dark. But the entity didn't come out. Instead, a voice echoed through the house. It didn't sound like a monster. It sounded like a chorus of overlapping, ancient voices, speaking with terrifying clarity. "We have reviewed your motion, Arthur. And we have found a severe flaw in your jurisdiction." Arthur backed away toward the parlor windows, his hands trembling. "The contract is binding," he shouted into the darkness, his voice cracking with a fear he hadn't felt before. "You agreed to the terms by remaining within the property lines." "The property lines are mortal concepts," the chorus of voices echoed from the hallway, drawing closer, though the hallway remained empty. "You cited the Covenant of 1442. But you failed to read the addendum. Section 12, Clause 7. Any mortal who uses the laws of the dead against the dead implicitly forfeits their status as a living observer. By entering the legal arena of the afterlife, you have legally declared yourself a citizen of it." Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He desperately lunged for the front door, grabbing the brass handle. It was locked solid, frozen over with a layer of thick, unyielding ice. He turned around, his back pressed against the wood, as the green light from the book expanded, filling the entire room. The shadows on the walls began to stretch and twist, turning into ghostly figures holding spectral scrolls. The entity finally emerged from the hallway. It was no longer a mindless shadow. It had taken on a terrifyingly formal appearance, a towering figure draped in judicial robes made of pure darkness, its face a pale, skeletal mask. In its hand, it held a massive, glowing parchment. "Arthur Pendleton," the entity boomed, its eyes flaring with malicious violet light. "You are hereby served with an eternal subpoena. You are required to appear before the High Court of the Abyss." Immediately, Arthur tried to find a loophole, a contradiction, anything to save himself. "I request an appeal," he screamed, his voice echoing uselessly against the frozen walls. "I demand a stay of execution under the right of mortal recourse." The skeletal judge raised a massive gavel made of blackened bone. "Appeal denied," the entity boomed, its voice vibrating through Arthur's very teeth. "Your arguments are irrelevant. You chose to play our game, lawyer. Now you must abide by our verdict." The judge brought the gavel down, striking the air. The sound was cataclysmic. The floorboards beneath Arthur's feet shattered into dust, revealing not the basement below, but a swirling, bottomless vortex of purple fire and screaming souls. The gravity of the underworld seized him, pulling him downward into the abyss. He clawed at the remaining floorboards, his fingernails bleeding, but the wood gave way. The next morning, the real estate agent arrived at Blackwood Manor to check on the property. The house was completely warm, sunny, and peaceful. On the parlor desk, she found Arthur's fountain pen, his neat legal notepad, and the Codex of Ethereal Jurisprudence. Written on the notepad in fresh, wet ink was a single line of text. Property transferred to the previous tenant. Court adjourned. And from the small, dark broom closet in the hallway, a new sound could be heard at exactly 2:44 a.m. The frantic, desperate scratching of a man trying to find a way out.